Hello. 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 Welcome back. Just checking that everyone can hear me here. Thank you. Perfect. Perfect. Well, I hope you've all enjoyed your very busy morning. I know that you've been hard at work. And we're now going to move on to our question and answer session, where you can put your questions to our cross-party panel of members of the Scottish Parliament. For those who weren't here last night, you might have heard me say that the last time I took part on this particular panel, I found myself on Europe's longest zip wire in the south of Scotland. Not at the same time, but it just shows you, well, I know the powers of persuasion of those gathered here today, and it's about, getting to know one better and understand how we can best work together. So you have a fabulous opportunity today to put questions to our panel, who are Kate Forbes, MSP, who's the Deputy First Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Gaelic, Murdo Fraser, MSP, who's the party spokesperson on business for the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, Michael Mara, MSP, who's the party spokesperson on finance for Scottish Labour, and Lorna Slater, MSP, who is the party spokesperson on economy for the Scottish Green Party. Please do participate fully as you can. I will try to include as many delegates as possible, and as I frequently say to my colleagues in this chamber, the more concise questions or responses are, the more we can get through and the more people are able to be involved. So, who would like to kick off with a question for our panel? Yes.
To all the panellists, there's 1 year left until the next Scottish parliamentary election. What is the one thing your party thinks could be delivered by this Parliament in that year that would help Scotland's businesses?
Okay, thank you. I might just ask too if you would just introduce yourself.
Donald Russell from the Scottish Retail Consortium.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to start with the Deputy First Minister and work this way for this question.
Thanks very much. So I'll tell you what my answer used to be, but now what it is in terms of responding to the global uncertainty. So I think we've always prided ourselves, and this is something that's had cross-party support. We've always prided ourselves that as a small island nation, export is the lifeblood of our economy, and we're really good at it. It's not politicians to thank, it's the businesses who build, create, invent incredible goods, produce, and export it. The level of instability right now is having quite a detrimental impact, and I think we'll only see the figures start to emerge in the coming months of just how detrimental that has been. So in order to even just stand still on exports, we have to redouble our efforts. And the First Minister obviously didn't give any hints or tips ahead of the programme for government, so I'm not going to either, but export's really important. And I think in the next year, we have got all hands on deck from Parliament, government, business to say, look, if we have that level of instability, what are we going to focus on? I'll give you an example. Last week, I spent 2.5 days in the United Arab Emirates, who have risen in terms of single country forecast sales for Scottish companies from the top 5 to second only to the US, and they're still growing. Food and drink, clean energy, small satellites, the list is incredible, and that's a growing economy. So my point is that rather than wringing our hands in despair about what is happening, because that would be a perfectly legitimate response, let's turn it into an opportunity. And I think there's a huge opportunity there. A couple of months ago, my answer would have been attracting more private investment, because I think that's one of our country's biggest challenges and opportunities. But that's my new answer. And you asked for one, and I'm only going to give you one.
Thank you. Murdo?
Thanks very much. Thanks to Ewan for the question. I'm going to say tax competitiveness. What we've seen is a business rates regime in Scotland where it is now disadvantageous for sectors like retail, hospitality and leisure in Scotland compared to south of the border, because Barnett consequentials have not been passed on by the Scottish Government. So if you're in retail in Scotland, you're paying more in business rates than you would be down south. And the same applies in income tax. So if you're earning more than £30,000 in Scotland, you pay more income tax, and at higher levels that turns into quite significant amounts. The committee did a visit just about this time last year to Prestwick Airport, which is fascinating to see all the work that's going on there. We visited Ryanair, who have a very well-developed, an excellent facility for the repair and maintenance of aircraft, employing about 600 people. The biggest barrier they have to expanding at Prestwick is they cannot attract qualified aircraft engineers to move to Scotland, because at the pay point they are at £78,000, they would be paying roughly £1,500 more in income tax in Scotland, and they cannot persuade people to move from elsewhere in the UK to Scotland. So that tax differential is acting as a barrier to our opportunity to grow the Scottish economy, and that's one thing we would want to change.
Thank you. Michael?
Thanks, Alison, and thanks to all you for coming along today. This is really intimidating, I have to say. We obviously normally sit on the outside. I was saying to my colleagues, I feel like kind of a subject in a show trial. You might put your hands up and decide to execute me at any moment. So it's a pleasure to be here. If I was to highlight one thing, I think I would say skills reform. Some of the First Minister's remarks this morning and the questions that were being asked about the labour market and the challenges that businesses have. I know that representing the North East, that's absolutely common across all different parts of the economy. We have had a plethora of damning reports from Audit Scotland, from the Withers Review, which pulled the system apart, but we haven't put it back together again. So the time to do this, the best time to do this would have been a decade ago. The second best time is straight away, immediately, right now. Because the situation we have with our colleges, which have been hollowed out over the last 14 years, is completely unacceptable. But our universities are increasingly in crisis as well across Scotland. And I think that the long-term headwinds for that are going to be really acute in terms of the kind of economic growth that Kate and Murdo have both referred to that we need in this country. But if we're not going to solve that as the day-to-day job of this Parliament and the government that we hold to account, then we will be missing the true fundamental of making sure we make the most of our people in Scotland.
Lorna?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Yeah, I think what in the next year the Scottish Government needs to do, and what the Parliament needs to hold them account for doing, is a clear direction of travel and certainty. Prevaricating on publishing the energy strategy, for example, is devastating for renewable energy businesses, but also for oil and gas businesses that need to plan their future. If that's not set out, how can any of us plan a just transition? Things like, again, prevaricating and watering down the heat and buildings bill, that doesn't give a clear steer to our heat pumps and other businesses, heat pump manufacturers and other businesses that really need that commitment to that process of decarbonising our housing, and even implementing existing legislation such as the Heat Networks Act to promote that clean energy, that inexpensive, circular energy that is reclaimed, so that we can develop heat networks to reduce our cost of energy, reduce our carbon input, and of course, heat network businesses and all the accompanying infrastructure and technology with that are all things that we do build in Scotland and are expert in, and that would allow those industries to expand.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take a couple of questions at any one time. So I'll take a question here in the second row and a question in the third row here, but we'll have this microphone first. Thank you, and if you just introduce yourself, and please feel free to stand if you wish to.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Claudia Duffy, and I'm an ambassador in the intellectual property sector and also, I'm an entrepreneur in the intellectual property sector and also an ambassador for Women's Enterprise Scotland. My question actually relates to the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, which was launched by the government in March 2022. So my question is addressed to all the representatives here as to, can you give us an update as the business community, can you give us an update as to where that strategy is? Because it placed a lot of emphasis on entrepreneurial skills development, equal society, fairer society, as well as productivity in business for all regions of Scotland. Many thanks.
Thank you. And just to, we'll take the question here too.
Prosper. My question is around skills in the workforce, so that's our topic for today. We've been doing a lot of work on housing. We have a housing emergency, and one of the big things that's come through from that is the need for investment in skills in house building and in construction, and a huge shortage that potentially holds us back. So I suppose my question is now the time for a more urgent response to that by way of perhaps a task force and investment in skills for construction and house building? And a second question is just about that kind of joining up of skills across government. How do we do that better than the way that we're doing it at the moment, so that we can be, as some of the discussions have had today around ensuring that we're all staying agile and responsive to how the workforce is changing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think in the first instance, I'll put that question, well, both of those questions to Murdo.
Thank you very much. I mean, the question on NSET, I think, is probably better answered by the Deputy First Minister, given the government are in charge of that particular process. As a committee, it's something we have looked at, but where precisely the timescale is around it, I'll leave Kate to respond to that. In terms of the issue around skills and construction, it's an absolutely valid point to ask, because we continually see concerns around the fact that we have an ageing workforce in construction. There are not enough young apprentices coming in, learning the essential skills. And it ties in with a broader picture, which we were discussing actually in the session I was introducing earlier on, around how we view the whole post-school skills and learning landscape. So we have around 50% of school leavers currently going to university. Michael Fairley made the point a moment ago, university funding is currently in crisis. The model we've had over the last number of years, where we are cross-subsidising free education for Scottish students in large numbers by attracting lots of international students paying large fees, is no longer working for lots of different reasons. But also, I think there's a question as to whether that meets needs of our economy, because the demand in the economy is for people with skills around STEM, around technical skills, around the need for better vocational education, and in particular, around the need for more apprenticeships. And part of the concern I would have around the direction of travel from Scottish Government, taking the apprenticeship funding currently under Skills Development Scotland and putting that under the Funding Council, which also funds universities and colleges where there's a crisis, I think there's a concern that some of that apprenticeship funding gets siphoned off in towards funding universities and colleges, which is exactly the opposite direction we need to be going, where in fact what we need to be doing is investing more in apprenticeships and seeing apprenticeships not as some sort of second-class option for people who can't get to university, but as a way of providing people with the skills our economy needs, but also the opportunities they need for the future, because their earning capacity, as somebody who's a qualified joiner or electrician or bricklayer, is probably as good as, if not better, than many university graduates. So we need to look at the funding model, but look at the emphasis we put on the types of careers that are available to young people.
Thank you. Lorna?
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Well, this will be a rare moment of agreement between Murdo and myself, as you can imagine, but I'll follow up on that point as well. The focus on workplace learning, I think, has got to be where we are in the future. Certainly in the Committee for Economy and Fair Work, which Murdo and I are both members, we hear this a lot: frustration of businesses with how the university and colleges are not able to provide them with the skills that they need. They're not able to keep up with the technology. They're stuck to a rigid schedule which doesn't work. If they take on an apprentice in January and that student can't start until September, that doesn't work for the business. So this alternative and workplace learning, I think, has got to be the future, and how we integrate that throughout lifelong learning and increase the prestige of that, to make sure that we are valuing the skills that are coming through that route. Members at my session this morning will hear how I myself am a graduate of workplace learning, and I learned far more on a job than I ever did in a classroom. On the first question, one of the outcomes from the original NSET, because I know it's been revised since, was an increased look at inclusive and democratic business models, so that's cooperative, social enterprises, and so on. And recently, that report has been published about how we can increase that in Scotland, because I think we're all aware of the disproportionate well-being economy benefits that come from businesses where the employees have a stake in how well that business does and how that ripples out into communities. And I'm looking forward to the group that's Following on from that report, the recommendation, the Economic Democracy Group is now formed, I'm told, and I'm looking forward to their outcome of their work.
Okay, thank you. Deputy First Minister.
Thanks very much. So for those in the audience, the National Strategy for Economic Transformation was a 10-year programme. It was basically based on 5 pillars. Anything that's 10 years is going to inevitably have to respond to the twists and turns. Nobody perhaps in 2022 envisaged where it would be on tariffs, for example. So you do have to be responsive. So whilst there's been talk about the need to review, reform, my commitment is that actually those pillars are the same pillars that they always needed to be, and we need to ensure that we are delivering them in an effective way. So there was one on entrepreneurship, which is my personal favourite, because I think it's people that will change the world. I think it's people that will pioneer new ways of doing things, people in business, people in the public sector. So entrepreneurship. 2 of the commitments we made were around tech scalers and the Pathways Fund. Tech scalers was about a completely new way of supporting tech entrepreneurs, and the First Minister alluded to the outcome today. It has far exceeded all of our aspirations and expectations. The figure for last year alone showed that the number of businesses that benefited almost doubled from 502 to 978. The number of people being supported, these are tech entrepreneurs in a whole host of different sectors, went up from 610 to 1,411. And between them all, they raised £118 million in the last 2 years. So in terms of quantitative output figures, statistics of value, I think that tells a story. We also committed to getting more women into entrepreneurship, and I am chuffed to bits that we've just appointed Anna Stewart as the new Chief Entrepreneur, who is an exceptional entrepreneur in her own right. And she, of course, launched the Pathways report, which is about supporting more women into entrepreneurship. Women get 2 pence in every pound of investment, and that's not a good figure. Considering that last time I checked, they're at least 50% of the population. So we should be aiming for a sort of comparative investment landscape. And this year's budget has the most money that we have ever allocated to female entrepreneurship. So those are some of there's 2 specific examples, but the other pillars are also hugely important. We talked about new markets. Scotland's made big strides in the last 2 years around renewables. We've got just short of around 40 gigawatts of offshore wind in the pipeline, lots of opportunities for the supply chain, and you heard earlier about things like the space sector and so on, fair work, productivity and skills also making progress. Some of them moving faster than others, which is understandable in a very challenging economic environment.
Thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, I think the appointment of Anna Stewart's an excellent appointment, I have to say. A really inspirational woman and business leader who has been an entrepreneur and has delivered value in the Scottish economy, and she'll show great leadership in there as well. And I agree with Kate in terms of the success of the tech scalers, some really good numbers being produced by that. Unfortunately, Anna's predecessor, Mark Logan, who produced the tech scaler report, left his position as Entrepreneur-in-Chief for Scotland, partly as a frustration about the lack of reform of the skills agenda, which is another one of the recommendations that he had in his report that brought forward the tech scalers. And so it just echoes my original point in terms of what we need in the economy. We need to make sure that if we're going to be training people for tech, that we're getting the STEM skills that are coming through our schools, but we're still not even recruiting enough teachers in those areas. It's a persistent problem that's gone on for years. I don't think the government is doing nearly enough to grip it. On the housing issue specifically, we have a real housing emergency, 10,000 children in temporary accommodation in Scotland. There's a moral imperative to do something about this, as well as the knock-on effect it has on our other public services, like the detrimental effect it has on health, living in poor housing, for instance, and also the economy. I would highlight, though, we talk a little about kind of negative externalities, and that's been highlighted in terms of the trade situation and what happens globally. There's also, we have to look at, for instance, what's happening across the UK, the push for 1.5 million homes to be built in England. Now, that's a real positive. But at the same time, it's going to create a challenge for the Scottish economy, because if we don't run at the same pace or faster, we're going to see actually a skills drain out of Scotland for talent. And we know in a situation where we've got a tight labour market, high demand, that's only going to lead to cost inflation in the sector. So we have to make sure that we understand that if the UK Labour Government is going to pursue that agenda to the benefit of people across the rest of the UK, that we don't just have to try and keep up our own commitments, we have to accelerate what happens in Scotland. Otherwise, the fact that anything that's built by the public sector in Scotland is approximately 30% more expensive in Scotland than it is in the rest of the UK, that's only going to get worse if we don't actually manage to keep up with that level of investment in people and in bricks and mortar.
Okay, thank you very much. Further questions? And we'll go to the fourth row here, and then over there too. So I'll just ask, there, you have your microphone.
Yeah, thank you. Stacey Dingwall, Federation of Small Businesses. The word business encompasses a diverse range of organisations in Scotland, although we know that the vast majority of them are small. And what we often hear from our members is that politicians don't understand the needs of small businesses, specifically as opposed to big businesses. Now, assuming the panel doesn't agree that that's the case, what would you say to reassure them that that's not in fact the case?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I'll take the other one too. Oh, hold on a second, just check. If you just put, that's fine, thank you.
It's okay, yeah. I'm Alison Harrison. I own a small business called Hot Yoga Edinburgh here in Edinburgh City Centre. I'm also an ambassador for Women's Enterprise Scotland and a professor of entrepreneurship at the University of Stirling. And my question is around business rates relief for this year. I see from the latest business rates for this year that hospitality have been offered a 40% discount. And during COVID, there was a precedent set, and I was involved in campaigning for that when the leisure sector was excluded initially from all COVID funding and support. Then gyms were included, but yoga studios and other types of fitness and leisure were still excluded. And finally, with a lot of campaigning, we were included as well in that support, and it was much needed, and it allowed my business to survive the COVID pandemic. Here we are again with business rate support for the hospitality sector, which is well deserved, but other high street businesses are equally impacted by the cost of living crisis. So what is the Scottish Government doing right now to support leisure and retail?
Thank you very much. Fabulous questions there. I'm going to put them in the first instance to the Deputy First Minister.
Thanks very much. So on Stacey's point around FSB and politicians not understanding small business, I think there's 3 points I would make in response to that. The first is that we are all members of society. I'm married to somebody who runs a small business. So if I don't understand small businesses, then I don't know how you do understand small business, because you don't need to lobby me, I get it at the dinner table. So there is a level of understanding there. Secondly, Scotland's backbone are small businesses, small and in some cases micro businesses. So whilst clearly our large businesses disproportionately, as it were, occupy a number of the statistics in terms of employment and so on, the small businesses are the backbone. The third is that whenever, and I'm sure this is a particular challenge for FSB, whenever people talk about small businesses, it always does a disservice to the fact that small businesses are not homogenous. So we've just heard about particular challenges, let's say in leisure, which will be totally different in some cases for some of the challenges in another sector. And obviously, you know, many people speak to me and nobody ever tells me when things are going well. They only ever talk to me when things are going badly. So I've got a very bleary-eyed view of the world. But you often will hear a contradiction and a conflict between businesses that want something and businesses that don't want something. And our job, and FSB have it particularly hard to balance all of those, which is why often in consultations there's an interesting diplomatic way that FSB phrases things to try and represent a lot of different businesses. So there are things that you have to manage. In terms of business rates, and you've set out the facts in terms of hospitality receiving 40% of the retail, hospitality and leisure, and I'm sure all my colleagues will tell us why that's a bad idea. But I think there's something on the horizon which is worth pointing to, and that is about the approach that the UK government is taking to overall reform of rates relief. And this is not a political point, this is a factual point, where there are proposals to essentially indefinitely manage a 40% relief, as I understand it, but they may update it, indefinitely manage a 40% relief to businesses in those sectors, but it will be funded by tax on larger businesses. So it's quite an interesting, it's quite a novel way of doing things. The difficulty we will have is that our business base is just fundamentally different. So they just have a lot more bigger businesses. That's what I mean by saying that the Scottish, that small businesses are the backbone of the Scottish economy. They just have a lot more bigger businesses. So they can make it work where bigger businesses will be able to be taxed in England to fund that indefinite 40% relief. We cannot do that. So there will have to be a fundamental different approach to what reliefs look like in Scotland and how that is funded. And as it is, because we have small businesses, whilst obviously there's an argument there about consequentials and what happens to consequentials, even if all the consequentials were passed on, it wouldn't cover the full number of small businesses. So I think that is all the more reason for us to have a very candid, frank conversation about the best way to support all small businesses, including yours, going forward, because we won't, if we were to replicate, copy and paste, it would actually do a disservice to the big business and the small businesses in Scotland. So we've just got a slightly different business base. There's not a problem with that, so we need to have a conversation about what we do with that. And you may see something in the programme for government to that effect, but you didn't hear it here.
Thank you. Pass on to Michael.
There's many things that Kate says that I agree with there. That I think, but I would start from the premise that a system of many discretionary reliefs is economically inefficient. And it doesn't work particularly well, that we're better having a more uniform system that people can understand and that businesses can be able to engage with and pay, as the huge overwhelming majority of businesses want to do, pay their taxes, contribute to the economy, and they know that that flows back into their bottom line as well. At the moment, the system just, I don't think, is working. We made the case when I had the conversations with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance around the budget that the quid pro quo across the UK for the increase in employers' national insurance was a rates relief at a far higher level than the Scottish Government were prepared to produce. Instead of producing that, they had, again, the point that the second colleague points to, where there was more opt-outs, some for hospitality, not for a common approach across businesses. I don't think it's efficient. I don't think it's fair. We need a full overhaul of non-domestic rates, and that will be in our manifesto come next year.
Thank you. Lorna?
Thank you very much. I do want to reassure you that we do understand small businesses. As people in my session this morning have heard, I'm an electromechanical engineer, and before I was elected in 2021, I worked in an assortment of small businesses my entire career. Now, all of these were cutting-edge technology firms, everything from Silicon Glen to renewable energy. And that is something that I think is often not recognized. I think many of us, when we picture a small business, maybe do picture some of our excellent retail small businesses and hospitality small businesses. Scotland's renewable energy revolution is being led by small businesses, as are our other tech sectors, software and so on. Having worked nearly my entire career in businesses of 25 or fewer employees, I absolutely recognize the challenges of those businesses. But also, as the Deputy First Minister says, the variation there, being a small wave generation or tidal generation company is entirely different than being a small food producer, for example. And it is so important that we look across sectors of how we can support that, because I think that the mention of entrepreneurship earlier makes me think of it. I think actually in Scotland we're not too bad at starting small businesses. I think where there's a gap is that scaling up piece. Big businesses do well partly because they can get in here and lobby us. Small businesses, there's quite a lot of tools out there to help people get started. Where are the tools to take already successful businesses in Scotland and grow them, the businesses that are 50 people, to grow them to 300 people? That's where there's a huge opportunity with our economy to increase good employment and to make sure that already successful businesses really have that space for growth.
Thank you. And Murdo?
Thanks. I mean, on the small business issue, just to pay some credit to the Federation of Small Business, who I think are a highly effective lobbying group. So none of us dare forget small businesses, because we'll get it in the neck from you and your colleagues at the FSB if we do forget about it. And you're very good, in particular, at connecting us with small businesses in the areas we represent, and making sure we hear that voice. So please be assured we are very conscious of your demands. On the business rates, and it does kind of overlap with that point too. In the previous 2 years, the previous UK government had granted 75% rates relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, and that really was a response to the fact that coming out of the COVID situation, these were businesses that were really suffering, particularly hospitality. Hospitality continues to suffer. There was a period when you could barely open a newspaper without reading about a hospitality business, a pub or a hotel or a restaurant closing down, because costs have gone up. Establishment costs have gone up, energy costs have gone up, staff costs have gone up. The increase in national insurance, employers' national insurance that's just kicked in just this month has a major impact. And at the same time, individual disposable income has been going down due to the rising cost of living. So you have this perfect storm. So that support for hospitality in particular, I think, was absolutely essential. Now, I'm pleased the Scottish Government have continued 40% hospitality support relief in the current year, but they haven't done that for retail or leisure, as you fairly say. And you only have to walk down the high street of any Scottish town or suburban area to see the issues with retail outside some of our major shopping and retail centres. Retail is really struggling. And I think, and our party view was that 40% relief should have been granted to retail and leisure as well. If you look at the decision taken by the UK government in the current budget year, that generated £140 million roughly in Barnett consequentials, money that came to the Scottish Government. Of that, they only spent, from memory, I think, just over 20 million on that rates relief. So 120 million was available and was spent elsewhere. And I think that was the wrong choice. And I think if we're serious about having a vibrant retail as well as a hospitality sector, we need to be supporting it through business rates relief.
Am I allowed to chip in? With just one other figure, which is the £700 million of business rates relief right across the board, just to clarify those figures a little bit.
Okay, thank you. On to our next questions. Yes, I'll go to the second row here. And, well, for a bit of variety, I'm going to try and remember all of this, but we'll go to the second row here and the second row here in the first instance, but we'll come back to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Elsa Rayburn from Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We've talked a lot about the fantastic opportunities, particularly for our rural areas today, from some of the major developments before us. And we know, particularly in the Highlands and Islands, that a lot of our young people want to stay if the opportunities are there. The big issue is housing, and I just wondered if the panel, perhaps each member of the panel, could give their thoughts on what they think the individual major barriers are, and then how we can work together to solve them. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And over here in the second row.
Good afternoon, Dale Harris from ATL Turbine Services. The importance of exports was stressed earlier, but for certain energy-intensive manufacturing businesses, the UK has some very, very high electricity prices. So my question is, how can we make ourselves more competitive in that respect? And secondly, there's an artificial link between the unit cost and the gas price. So given our renewable situation, is that something that we could look at removing as well?
Thank you very much. We're certainly covering lots of different areas today, which is fabulous. And I'm going to put that question in the first instance to Michael.
Yeah. So we covered some of the housing issues already. I think you're absolutely right in terms of rural housing in particular. It is a huge challenge, and it's a huge challenge for making sure that we can deal with some of the second question, I have to say. So my inbox over the last year has had more traffic than anything else about pylons in the North East corridor that run in from Kintor to Teeling. People hugely concerned about the build out of that infrastructure, and I'm supportive of that infrastructure. Some people aren't very happy with me for that, but I think that it's integral to the future vision of what our economy looks like in Scotland and the kind of transition that we've talked about in terms of our energy sector. But getting that stuff built actually requires people who live in the area that are actually able to have the skills that again we've touched on, but making sure that they have housing. So the recent development from SSE, I believe it was, about making sure they've got employee housing in different parts of the Highlands to make sure that it can actually address that is absolutely critical. Making sure that we can work, I think, as governments, UK government, Scottish government, to scale up those opportunities. So as we see that infrastructure being built out, it should be an opportunity to actually help to address that housing problem, in part for the longer run. There are the other issues. Cost actually of building housing is incredibly high, particularly in rural areas, but across Scotland, as I've already mentioned, the cost of construction is significantly higher than other parts of the UK. I don't think that's something that the government is particularly focused on. And getting that cost differential down, or at least the kind of increasing rate of differential across the UK, would help us to get more value for our money as taxpayers. So those are parts. There are planning constraints, planning capacity, both in, and we do need to make sure that we have significant reform of the planning process, and that's in order to get some of this thing actually started. The intensive energy, the high level of energy costs for industry is absolutely restricting our economic potential as a country. We are in a very difficult situation with that, where we have to make sure that we, yes, meet our climate targets, that we take advantage of, I think, what to me, the transition to net zero. Some people from the right are sceptical about that, to say the least, are kind of prosecuting it as a case. I think it's frankly the animating purpose of huge parts of the Scottish economy at the moment. I think it's the place where we see the greatest potential that we could actually realise. And that's where we can actually, in the longer run, get those prices down. We have to make sure that we can we're less reliant on volatile international gas prices, that we are producing more of our energy domestically, that we get to the point where we have excess electricity through making sure that we build and that we deal with the issue of latency within that system, and that we can make sure that we can bring prices down as a result. That's not a short-term answer, though. I fully recognise that, and I know that the cost of energy is something not just householders but businesses are acutely aware of in the short run. So I think it's a case to go faster rather than slower.
Thank you. And Murdo?
Thanks. Can I start with the housing issue? And this came up in the session I was part of earlier on. And I mean, I represent an area that's mostly rural, partly urban. Outside of the cities, probably the biggest barrier to the ability of businesses to expand is the lack of availability of affordable housing. And particularly in the most rural communities, that's a major issue. And I meet continually people, for example, hospitality, who say they offer a job to people to come and work in a particular area. They accept the job, and 2 months later they turn around and say, we can't come because there's nowhere for us to live. And that's a huge problem. I think what we have to do is have a planning and regulatory regime that encourages the building of more homes. We have a housing crisis. We don't have enough houses. We have to build more and build more quickly. Now, the Scottish Property Federation said this week we've lost £3 billion of investment in the build-to-rent sector in Scotland because of the rent controls that were introduced. And that money's gone elsewhere. It's gone to Manchester. It's been invested somewhere else. There is no pipeline of new build-to-rent projects in Scotland because as a result of that policy. So that has to change, and we need to have a regulatory framework that encourages that investment. And as Michael Fraley said, planning just takes too long. And one of the things the UK Labour government has said that I would agree with is, we need to stop holding up every development to put in bat tunnels, because if we do that, we're not going to build anything very quickly. The whole system is too cumbersome, takes too long, and means we're not delivering the infrastructure we need, and that includes housing. So we need a rethink when it comes to that. Dale, on your energy price, I think one thing that really struck me, when I was an MSP first elected 20 years ago, one of the major industries we had in Fife was paper making. And what we've seen over the past 20 years is paper making has all but disappeared, with the exception, I think, of one producer. And we've seen the same with metal production and steel. We're still using steel, we're still using paper, we're buying it from China now because their energy costs are so much cheaper than ours. So we haven't reduced our carbon emissions, or rather we have reduced our carbon emissions here, but all we've done is export that to other countries. So that the cost of energy is a real concern. So you raised an interesting question about the connection between electricity prices and gas. Gas is still the source of electricity as the last resort. And if you look at the daily mix of energy in Scotland, there are times when still around 40% of our electricity comes from burning gas. So unless or until we can change that mix, the cost of gas is still going to be a significant factor in relation to electricity. And the UK government, I think Ed Miliband said he's looking at zonal pricing. That's an interesting idea. It's quite controversial because while I think consumers would argue for zonal pricing, a lot of people in the renewable sector are hostile to it because they think that would send out the wrong messages about investment in Scotland for renewable energy. So I think we have to tread quite cautiously when it comes to policy changes. But in terms of the headline, yeah, we have to do something to reduce the cost.
Thank you. Lorna?
And now we land with a crash on an area where Murdo Fraser and I do not agree. Housing is absolutely a fundamental issue in our economy at the moment, and it isn't just in rural areas. Edinburgh Council has declared a housing emergency. It is a problem absolutely everywhere. And the barriers that we see to it, planning is one of them, but it seems to me that as I travel around the country, every single potential development has its own problem. Oh, well, with this one, we can't get the landlord to sell the land. With that one, well, Scottish Water can't connect those houses to the water mains. Well, with that one, the council doesn't have the money to run an access road there. So in every single case, there is a different reason why that particular development can't go forward, but it becomes this kind of complicated suite of things where there isn't one button to push to fix it. It is very, very complicated to move forward and frustrating for all of us because this is absolutely the #1 topic that comes up. What doesn't come up in any of those conversations is bat tunnels. I've never come across a development where someone is saying, oh, we can't do this because of something like that. All developments do need to be nature positive. Scotland is one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, but that's absolutely possible to do and can be as straightforward as including things like Swift bricks in the buildings, making sure that the land around any buildings is cultivated for nature instead of as flat lawns and so on. One of the areas where this is a challenge, of course, is around flood risks, because as climate change progresses, more and more of Scotland is going to be increasingly affected by flooding. That's going to happen now because we have failed to stop the climate crisis from moving forward. And that does mean that SEPA does have to assess potential developments for flood risk, and that presents a barrier, absolutely. In terms of the electricity piece, of course, the best and most urgent thing we need to do is transition away from using gas. Obviously, that will take some time, but we could do it faster. And unlinking the gas and electricity prices absolutely needs to be done. Unfortunately, that can't be done in this Parliament. That is a reserved matter and would have to be done at Westminster. It is absolutely urgent that we do that because as electricity becomes more abundant and cheaper, having it artificially linked to expensive gas is harming all of us and indeed not allowing us to move forward, because we're not just needing to transition our existing energy usage over to clean energy, but as we discussed in our session this morning, emerging technologies like AI require even more energy. So we not only need to be efficient with the energy we use, not wasting it on trying to heat inefficient homes with gas, which is not an efficient way of doing it. We need to transition away from those things. We need to change how we think about energy generation. There should be solar panels on every roof. Everyone, I know I was in Orkney last week. Every small farm up there has a wind turbine. It's got to be thought about energy as something we all generate. It's not something that we just buy from a big provider.
Okay, thank you very much. And Deputy First Minister.
Thanks very much. Having listened so much, my notes are very long, so I'll try and keep it tight because there's been so much good stuff mentioned already. So on housing, and particularly in rural areas, I couldn't agree more, not least representing a rural area. But quite interesting, of the 21,000 homes built to the end of 23-24, 22% were in rural areas, and our target is 10%. So I think High should take the credit for that, and other people, I'm sure, can take some credit for that, because it is a major issue. How do we deliver more housing? Okay, here's my list. Funding. So we've just hiked it to £768 million of capital. Making sure that funding is flexible to also cope with infrastructure, which we have also done. Planning often is cited as the primary issue. Interestingly, there are thousands of consented sites that aren't being built on right now. So yes, we need to reform planning. We have introduced the master plan consent areas, big, vast areas where planning agreements are basically given up front to shortcut the explanation, given up front to give more security. We've got the planning hub, which brings people together to accelerate planning decisions and get more planners in. So in terms of the skills focus, planners are one of the top focuses for apprenticeships, and the Chief Planner recently wrote to all local authorities telling them to take a very flexible approach to getting applications through for housing as well. The other part is regulation, and Murdo talked about the SPF figures on build to rent. This week we've obviously listened very carefully on the rent controls point, and this, I think it was this week, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the consultation launched for what exemptions will be around rent controls. And the last two are making sure that we have access to land, which is a big challenge, particularly in rural areas, and then on people. So a big consented site in Shetland that would deliver 30 new homes, incredible. Can't get contractors to tender for it because they used to rely particularly on Hungarian labour. They've left, and they can't actually build the houses because of the workforce. So that's just a flavour. I think we know what needs to be done, and there's not a single bullet, and it's about bringing all these things together to move forward at pace. In terms of electricity prices, I mean, of all the issues that we are going to talk about today, I think few are as critical as energy prices. Again, you can correct me if my figures are wrong, but I think in the UK, on average, energy prices are about 50% higher than in Europe. And you look at, I think it was Murdo that mentioned a number of different industries, but you don't even need to look back into history. Just look at the last few weeks in terms of some of the major industrial players who have cited incredibly high energy costs. So this is key to delivering any industrial future for the United Kingdom. And that artificial link between gas and electricity is key. You look at the fuel poverty figures that were released in February this year, which basically said, right, we've done all this work on tackling fuel poverty, we've got way more insulated houses, but fuel poverty has risen again, and it shouldn't surprise anyone if your energy costs have gone up 3 times in the last year alone. And because this is a nice gathering and we all like each other, I'm not going to make any political points about us waiting for that £300 reduction to our energy bills, which is coming with GB Energy. So that is, we do need to, and I think zonal pricing is going to be hugely challenging, because we could end up in a position where we don't get the industrial opportunities and consumers don't get lower bills, because investors, developers just take decisions on the basis of that uncertainty or on the basis of a conclusion around zonal pricing, pull out, leaving consumers without their lower bills and leaving us without the jobs that can be created through the energy transition. So it is a matter of concern, and we are urging the UK government to provide as much certainty as quickly as possible on what market reform will look like.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take those 2 hands that were raised up the back there. Actually, I'm going to take 3 together because I'm conscious of time. So we'll hear these 2 questions here, and then from yourself in the second row.
Hello, my name is Sandy Kerr, and I work for Heriot-Watt University, but I'm actually based in Orkney. And we've been bringing students to Orkney from around the world for 30 years. And that's directly resulted in a cluster of renewable energy and marine science activity that is exporting business around the world. So it's a really good news story. But my question is, what are the other opportunities for rural Scotland outside the Central Belt around science, innovation and technology, going beyond the usual cliche of more farm salmon, more tourism? So what are those opportunities and how do we stimulate them?
Thank you for that. Yes.
Hi there, my name is Matthew Wallace and I'm one of the directors at the Cairndale Hotel and Spa in Dumfries. It's our family business and we've been running it for 40 years, not myself. Hopefully that's obvious, I'm not quite 40 yet. However, I know that business rates have been touched on and it has been highlighted that hospitality businesses have had relief, but that is only up to the value of 50,000 or 51,000. So a business like us with 160 to 180,000 pounds business rates, a hotel of our size down the road from us in England is receiving 40% rates relief currently and has previously for the past 2 years received 100% rates relief. Yesterday I did ask the Business Minister why have we not been afforded this relief, and I'll be honest, I didn't particularly get a concise answer. So my question really is, in layman's terms, why did the hospitality industry not receive the same support as was afforded to be able to do so by the UK government? And do we accept that we are going to see businesses close up and down the country as a result?
Thank you. And the second row here.
Hi, thank you. James Barry, Chief Executive for Renewable Parts. We're a supply chain specialist for wind turbines. Been delighted to hear the conversation, discussion around the emphasis on supply chain and how important it is for the aftermarket in the wind industry. I guess the question is how we generate it here, right home, for the installed fleet we have. Often in these situations, we're tempted to do something novel, but often the right solution is to actually repeat or replicate what's already existing, not reinvent the wheel. Do we have a task force, cross-sector or cross-party, that's visiting places like Denmark or other countries where it works really, really well, and they've absolutely perfected how to do this for a country of a similar size to our own? Thank you.
Thank you. And having said I've taken three, I have is it on a related point? Okay, can I just have a microphone on from 3 rows down here, please? There we go.
It's related to the hospitality question. So I'd like to ask the panel their individual views in a two-pronged question. I represent the Cairngorm National Park, so I'm the chair of the Chamber of Commerce. We have over 400 members, which is good news, but 80% of them are in the tourism industry. And as you've rightly pointed out, as a panel, the tourism industry has come under a lot of pressure. And ironically, we've talked a lot about affordable housing, and one of the increasing costs that has been levied against the tourism industry has been the short-term letting licence. So I'd like to ask the panel to come back or define whether or not the implementation of that short-term letting licence was two-pronged. One was to improve legislation, which I 100% subscribe to, as in making sure people are safe. But secondly, it was to release affordable housing. So I'd be interested to know whether affordable housing has been released on the back of an introduction of a short-term letting licence. And secondly, based on pressures within the industry, is this the time for introducing a visitor levy? Because from my feedback from my members, that is a massive problem coming down the stream, and particularly for small businesses.
Okay, thank you. I'm aware that taking all of those together is a challenge for my colleagues. So you have 4 very yeah, great questions on a whole range of issues. I'm going to go to Lorna in the first instance.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, I might only cover a couple, and just to first, if we all cover all 4, I think we'll run aground. I'm going to take the first question about science and technology available in rural areas, because that's one of my favourite topics. I think that there is a lot of potential for science and technology work in rural areas, even out with the renewable energy space that we all know so well. One of the big things that is on its way and underway is reform of agriculture. Now that is going to become much, much more technical because every farm is going to have to demonstrate biodiversity net gain. In order to do that, there's a lot of science that has to go with that, soil quality testing, apps that take pictures of hedgerows to show that your hedgerow is growing, satellite photography to show how the land use is changing. There are huge opportunities both in developing new tech for that, supporting farmers and land managers to use that, and of course actually doing the science itself to detect carbon emissions from soil, health of soil, and so on. Likewise, forestry requires all of those things too. And as we're growing more things in Scotland, restoring our nature both commercially through sustainable farming and through sustainable forestry, climate change is still progressing, so there are more plant health risks. We're going to be more at risk of funguses, pests, and other things that are coming after our crops and coming after our forests. That also takes science and technology to combat them, particularly as the UK is more or less aligned with the EU on the phasing out of pesticides, which means that instead of chemical solutions, there will have to be technological and other science-based solutions. So yes, there are huge opportunities for science and technology in the rural space. I could go on nature restoration, ecotourism, all of that. And that's on top of what we already know about renewable energy generation and distribution. So huge potential there. I'll just coming quickly on the point around short-term lets. I live in an urban area. I live just near here in Edinburgh, and we have similar problems with the short-term lets. I don't know about releasing affordable housing because that's kind of not how Edinburgh goes, but it does release for housing. When the short-term lets legislation came in here, flats which had been used as Airbnbs or whatever are now being lived in by people. So that does make a difference. It makes a difference to how our tenement stairs work, how our quality of life is for those of us who live in tenements. It's so important, and this is how the law works, that for short-term lets and for the tourist levy, those are implemented locally. What the Scottish Parliament did is allow those powers to exist. It is entirely up to local authorities when to do those, how to implement them, so that it's suitable for their local areas. And that is absolutely as it should be.
Deputy First Minister.
Thank you very much. I don't know how the presiding officer hears anything from here, because I am struggling to hear all of your comments. And so when we're all shouting in the chamber, it's a wonder you hear anything. Okay, so in terms of rural Scotland, so I am a bit biased, I will apologise, because I think rural Scotland is in the vanguard of driving growth, prosperity, probably for the world, to be perfectly honest, certainly for Scotland and certainly for the United Kingdom. And in terms of the opportunities that we have across the Highlands and Islands right now, but across rural Scotland more generally, it is astonishing. I don't know if these figures are confidential or not, so Stuart Black can tell me if they are afterwards, but I think there's about £100 billion worth of opportunity right now across the Highlands and Islands alone, and a lot of that is in the particular sectors that were just referenced in around science, technology, construction. I know we've got representatives here, and I never do a speech without referencing Ali Ferguson, so why break a habit of a lifetime and talk about what's happening at Kishorn, which is hugely exciting. So just the opportunities. So if you're thinking of relocating, we will definitely find some houses for you, and you're all very welcome because of the opportunities right now. So I totally disregard a previous view of the Highlands and Islands, which was sort of low wage, service economy, and so on. It's really cutting edge and very exciting. In terms of non-domestic rates, I hear your pain, so can I say that up front? I hear the pain that you mention. I know that you are not short of enormous challenges right now, not least because I think you mentioned quite a big workforce and what that means in terms of employers' NICs and so on, and energy prices have been referenced already. In terms of the non-domestic rates, there is a difference between Scotland and England. We only ever hear, obviously, where that is felt to be to someone's disadvantage. There are also rates relief which are to the advantage of Scottish businesses. So overall, there are £730 million of non-domestic rates reliefs currently operational this year. So it is a very competitive non-domestic rates relief system, but we have to make choices. And I think I already referred to the fact that we have a slightly different business base. So 92% of hospitality businesses are getting that relief. But I appreciate that if you're in the 8%, you don't want to hear about that. So I am conscious of that, and it is choices that have to be made within a budget, and I don't think there's ever going to be enough money to go around to relieve everybody of the many, many pressures that they face. On the supply chain and where we learn, I think that was I couldn't quite hear, but I think it was where do we learn on the supply chain. Yes, did go to Denmark to see what they've done. I generally try and do very few trips. So in the last, I think, 3 years, I've only done Denmark and the UAE. Phenomenal. Our big opportunity is how do we de-risk the investment in the supply chain up front so it's there when all the developments get the financial investment decisions and get through CFD allocations and so on and are ready to go, because the mistake we made 20 years ago was that we had lots of renewable energy but people had to go elsewhere for the supply chain. And that's what we want to change now by de-risking, providing certainty, investing in the supply chain right now so that when the developments get over the line, they look over their shoulders and there's a factory there, there's a manufacturing facility there in order to cater for it. And just on the Cairngorm National Park point and 80% tourism, I mean, the delivery of affordable housing is primarily through new supply. So £768 million. I talked about that difference of figures. We've got a target of 10% of all the investment that is being spent going towards rural affordable housing. That has been 22% in recent years. So we want to continue to deliver that. But to my mind, I've gone through how we deliver that recently. And in terms of short-term lets, it's just about making sure that if you've got a thriving tourism industry, you can have lots of commercial property that is inviting tourists in. But if there's nobody to work in them because nobody can live, then that will not be a sustainable industry, and that's what we're trying to get right. And as for the visitor levy, I have many conversations with Highland Council about it.
Thank you. Murdo?
Thanks very much. Sandy, going back to your point about innovation, if you're not familiar with the James Hutton Institute in Invergary, that is doing fantastic world-leading research work in crop science that will deliver enormous benefits and employing some of the most intelligent, talented people in the globe in terms of leading that work. And that's going to have enormous economic benefits, not just in terms of the academic community, but in terms of the way we develop agriculture in Scotland and leading the world. So that's just one example. On the hospitality issue, I've talked earlier about the issue of tax competitiveness. On the issue of short-term lets, I recognise Lorna's point. I think there was an issue in Edinburgh with the proliferation of short-term lets in the city centre. I think what we didn't need was a one-size-fits-all policy that then applied to the whole of Scotland that got very cumbersome, expensive and bureaucratic, and then caught home sharers and small B&Bs and guest houses at the same time. A consequence of which is, personally, I know a number of people who ran small B&Bs who said, we're not doing this anymore. It's simply not worth our while. It's just too expensive. It's too cumbersome. It's too bureaucratic. We're just not going to bother. And yeah, I mean, there are in some rural areas a shortage of houses. Self-catering accommodations have been a hugely important part of the tourist offer in communities. We need to build more houses. It comes back to the earlier conversation. If there aren't enough houses, we need to build more. We shouldn't be trying to artificially restrict the use of the ones we currently have. Let's deal with the issue by expanding supply. And then finally, on the visitor levy issue, I think people are quite familiar, if they go to other countries, paying a small daily charge or nightly charge, fixed sum, as a contribution, as a visitor levy. I think the problem we have in Scotland is we are already a very expensive destination to visit. We have 20% VAT, which I think is the second highest rate in Europe on hospitality, and we're adding a charge on top of that, making us even more expensive. And I think the one change I would have liked to have seen to the legislation, which would have made it better, was to allow councils the option to have a flat charge instead of a percentage, because that would be far easier for businesses to deal with rather than a percentage. And I hope maybe the Scottish Government might still just reflect before the visitor levy comes in a year's time, that is a change that could still be made.
And the last word to Michael.
Thank you, Alison. Where to start? I think actually the question of despair, I think from a colleague up here about hospitality is exactly the reason why this kind of system of widespread discrete reliefs in different areas where you end up coming to Parliament saying with no actual prospect of a positive answer to your question, if it can be fair to Kate, that actually it's going to be any difference made. We're saying, why us? Why us? We need to get away from that kind of system. We need to make sure that we have a flatter system that actually meets the needs of the country and is more intelligible to people, so they're not just coming and asking questions of despair. On the supply chain question, I think it's a really good point, and it would be great if what Kate was saying was actually happening. But nowhere near enough of it is. We're not seeing the actual benefits of the opportunity. Far too much of the components for offshore renewables are being shipped in, and we're not seeing the domestic production. Yes, of course, there's domestic content regulations within the contract for difference. There are stuff in the Scotland round. But if you've got a situation where you don't have a pipeline of projects, different opportunities for people to actually base their production in the country, then it's not going to happen. We're not seeing that pipeline of opportunities coming through. And part of that is with things like Berwick Bank, which has now been sitting on the Minister's desk for years to get a permission. So Kate's shaking her head. Maybe we'll hear next week. But it's a different perspective on it. But we need to make sure if we're going to deliver these kind of capacity, then we have to make sure that works through a lot quicker, and all the hurdles that are put in place. It's right that environmental considerations are met, of course it is, but it can't take as long as it is, because that's what's going to clog up a competition for international capital to make the investment to then make sure that you can build the capacity in Scotland. I'm a little bit sceptical about the big opportunities around advanced regulation. I have to say, in terms of environmental regulation, that businesses are going to see particular upsides. Yes, there might be opportunities for technological development, but I think that's probably just kind of balanced off in terms of the extra cost. I do think, though, increasing the productivity of agricultural sector will be based on advances in technology. I can see that in parts of rural Angus at the moment, making sure that more things are done by robotics, and that deals with some of the issues that we've talked about our labour market and the restrictions that we have as a result. I was going to use Murdo's example as well, the James Hutton Institute, which is at the bottom of the hill outside my house, but it's the International Barley Hub that's there. But I think Lorna touched on that. I would fully agree that I think that actually the circumstances of climate change means that there are a changing environment that we do have to adapt to, and there are opportunities within that on a scientific basis in particular. So I think that there are real opportunities there. But I actually don't think it's about us identifying those opportunities. It's about businesses telling us what the opportunities are, making sure that they know that there's a marketplace for that, and that the science can lead us in that way as well. And that's why we need a university sector that can actually work and can pay the bills.
Thank you very much. Time dictates that we have to draw this session to a close here. I'd like to, well, I'm sure you'd want to join me in thanking our panellists, and you too. Well, thank you to our panellists. Thank you, for so many interesting and diverse questions. It's fair to say we've covered a range of issues, and our panellists can now take their seats again. And I'm sure you thought that was a thoroughly decent session, Michael, and you'll never be scared to sit out here again. Anyway, we'll just head back to where we need to go, and we'll move on in a second. Yes, I'm now very pleased to invite Kate Forbes, MSP, the Deputy First Minister and the Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Gaelic, to make her closing remarks. Deputy First Minister.
Well, thanks very much. It seems a little bit unfair because you've just had to listen to me for the last hour, and you get to listen to me a little bit more. But I'm going to keep my remarks quite brief, because it is great to see an event like this, which is candid, it's open, it's free-flowing. You're able to put your questions directly to us and hear our replies, some of which might give confidence and others which might reduce confidence. So it's wonderful to have that open relationship. And at the end of the day, all of us have a stake in Scotland's economy being successful. As small businesses, big businesses, representatives of different sectors and clusters, you have a huge stake in, obviously, your own business and sector being successful. But that success is so often part of a much wider national success. And then we, obviously, as representatives of constituents, as representative of government, also have a huge stake in you being successful. And the bottom line for me is that without a growing and thriving economy, which, by the way, relies on the enterprising, hard work, determination and ingenuity of our businesses, without a growing and thriving economy, we cannot achieve any other aims that we set ourselves. We cannot eradicate child poverty, which relies on well-paid, secure employment, only created when there is a prosperous economy. We cannot have a transition to net zero. It can't be achieved through public funding alone or public ideas alone. We need representatives like we have here today in the room to be driving that approach to net zero, to come up with the technological solutions to make the changes. And then lastly, we cannot have resilient public services without a growing and thriving economy, because there is no tax revenue to reinvest in our growing, in our resilient public services. So I'm very conscious that whatever objectives we set ourselves in the programme for government this May, or as parties look ahead to elections next year and draft manifestos, each and every single one of those objectives relies on all of the people in this room being successful in delivering the kind of Scotland that we want. And so often, if you look at Scotland's history, it's against the backdrop of turmoil, of economic instability, that Scottish enterprise has risen to the challenge and the occasion and has completely changed the direction, in some cases, of global issues. And that's where we need to be today. I joked earlier that nobody ever talks to me when things are going well. Incidentally, that's the truth. But you certainly don't have a shortage of challenges right now. The First Minister mentioned some of them in his opening remarks this morning. It has been at least 10 years of thinking that just if we get through the next hurdle, there will be a period of stability and calm. And I think we've probably all given up thinking that, because so far it has proven to be a false hope. But whether it was the impact on exports of some of the uncertainty around Brexit, whether it was the devastating impact of COVID, whether it was the cost of living crisis and energy prices spiralling, whether it's the challenges of recruitment with a more challenging immigration environment, or whether now it is the will he, won't he, what on earth is happening in the next 90 days as a consequence of the President of the United States tariffs, it is extremely challenging. And in a circumstance like that, as a government minister who is often put on the spot to come up with the answers, my view is that whilst you can comment on and think through these many challenges, there are many things that we can't control. And so we have to focus on the things that we do control. Because Scotland is enormously blessed. Scotland is blessed with incredible people, incredible talent, incredible entrepreneurs, incredible thinkers, incredible academics, incredible researchers, incredible people who deliver day in, day out, brilliant products and brilliant services for Scotland. We, secondly, have industrial strengths that many other countries would love to have. We know what our heritage is around energy, but we have on the horizon this incredible second opportunity in and around energy. ScotWind massively exceeded our original targets of about 8 gigawatts, and we decided to proceed in the hope that that early mover, first mover advantage that it would give us on offshore wind and renewable energy would put Scotland very much in the driving seat for the opportunities that come from the supply chain. Now, it's a complex picture in terms of making those investments up front, providing as much certainty as possible, and incidentally, and maybe we don't talk about it enough, working very closely with the UK government, who hold many of the levers in this regard, in order to ensure that we don't just celebrate the fact that our wind is creating a lot of jobs in other countries, but we are celebrating that it's our renewable energy that has completely transformed our manufacturing base, our industrial base, and created many opportunities for small businesses. So we can control that as well. The third thing that we have is a growing markets. We heard a little bit earlier from Dr. Khan and her very inspirational address around the space sector. But these high growth potential areas where Scotland is very much setting itself apart. And that was always my vision for things like tech scalers. How do we create an environment, not just a particular fund that will come and go or a particular initiative that will come and go, but how do we create an environment, an ecosystem that supports entrepreneurship, particularly in and around technology, that allows connections, networks, best learning, and yes, funding to ensure that we have thousands of more startups that scale up and ultimately go for the top as unicorns. And we have a skilled and adaptable workforce. And that workforce is the area that we have been primarily focused on in today's event. What does a workforce for the future look like? Now, there is reform ongoing in terms of the higher and further education landscape and skills and learning. But over and above that, there is an opportunity for us to move quickly to deliver some of those skills that we need, not in the future, but that we need right now. And the First Minister mentioned that that is very closely connected with immigration, because sometimes we confuse skills and workforce. We are a small country, and you can have a highly skilled workforce, but is very few in number, and you can have a huge workforce that is poorly skilled. We need to make sure that we have the right size of workforce and that it has the right skills. And I know even in the energy sector in particular, there is a lot of efforts going in to training the workforce for the future. But our colleges are willing to be flexible, they are willing to adapt, and there's particular interventions that we can make to rapidly accelerate some of the particular skills that we urgently need. One of those is advanced manufacturing, which is needed for a number of different sectors that offer huge potential for growth. And as the co-convener of the Advanced Manufacturing Industry Leadership Group, we've been looking at different short-term interventions that can generate hundreds of skills as close to immediate. But the one I wanted to finish my remarks on is one that the First Minister also mentioned today, and is very quickly becoming a primary focus for me, and that is economic inactivity. I mentioned earlier that there are things that we can't control and we can talk about at length, but when you don't control them, you're sometimes feeling like you're wasting your breath. When you can't change immigration and you can't decrease unemployment any lower than 3.7%, where can you go? And for me, it is economic inactivity. And as the First Minister said, quite rightly, many people are classified as economically inactive for good reasons. It is good that carers care. It is good that students learn. It's good that parents parent, which is one of my feelings. But there are others who want to work and who, for whatever reason, have challenges. And that is where business and government, I think, have a new opportunity to work together hand in glove in fixing a challenge for both of us. Because we want more people to be in well-paid, secure employment. We know that that is a route out of poverty. We know that that is a route that resolves a lot of other inequalities. And you need a workforce. And so there's an opportunity there to work with employers to reach people that are furthest from the job market, to understand what will make the difference. Often there are interventions there already which get people closer to the job market. Indeed, there are interventions that get them into the job market, but not enough of them stay in the job market. So there's an opportunity there for employers to look at what you need in order to support those who want to go back into work, and there's an opportunity there for us to do something completely different and pioneering. So when we're talking about future workforce, I'm conscious that the next hour is classified as the future as well. So that future can't be in 10 years' time, 20 years' time. It starts now. There are opportunities for us to make a difference. And the reason why I ended on that economic inactivity point is because it, again, demonstrates more than anything else why enterprise, business, the work that you do is absolutely key to every other objective. Because if we can support people, if you can change people's lives with a brilliant, rewarding opportunity to do something incredible in the public sector or in the private sector, you change all of their prospects. And we know what the evidence is in terms of that. So it's a new opportunity for us to work together to solve some of these issues. But my last comment is really just to thank you again, not just for being here today, but for all that you do in your communities as cornerstones of your sectors. It's a challenging outlook right now, but Scotland holds a lot of cards. We play them right, we can transform the future, and I'm very grateful for the part that you play in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy First Minister. I'd like to thank all of today's speakers and panellists, and of course thanks to you all for taking time in your incredibly busy schedules to be with us and to be in the Scottish Parliament today. We will be emailing a feedback form shortly, and your views with regards to how we improve Business in Parliament Conference would be massively helpful to us as we plan for the next one. But we're now concluding with a light lunch, where you'll have an opportunity to continue to get to know one another. I hope you have all enjoyed the conference. I've been really, really privileged to host you here in the Parliament today. And can I just ask everyone to leave that way? So it's out that door that's just down the ramp there. And yes, see you at lunch in a few minutes. But thank you one and all. Thank you.